I inherited nothing, while cousins got $20 million. Now I'm richer than all of them. My grandfather used to say something that stuck with me my whole life. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first generation makes it. The second generation keeps it. The third generation is my cousins Chad and Madison. I'm Jake, 42 years old, contract lawyer, and apparently the guy who got stuck being the second generation, even though technically I'm the third. I'm the one who reads the fine print, the one who shows up to family gatherings in a Toyota Camry, while everyone else pulls up in cars that cost more than my annual salary. Last Thanksgiving was a masterclass in humiliation. I walked into my aunt's McMansion in Dallas wearing my Brooks Brothers suit, the one I bought on sale 3 years ago and have been rotating through every major family event since. Chad took one look at me, and I could see that smirk forming on his face. The same smirk he's had since we were kids, when he realized his trust fund was bigger than mine. Chad is the kind of guy who thinks IPO stands for a new craft beer brand. I'm not joking. He actually asked me once if I wanted to invest in an IPO he heard about at his country club, and when I started asking basic questions about the company's financials, he looked at me like I was speaking Mandarin. This is a man who inherited a real estate empire and somehow thought cryptocurrency mining was a good way to diversify. He lost $2 million before I had to step in and explained that his mining rig was just heating up his garage. He circled around me at Thanksgiving like a shark who just spotted a wounded seal. Then he said it, the thing that made everyone in the kitchen stop and look over. Seriously, Jake? Brooks Brothers? That's what my dad used to wear back in like the 90s. Madison and I are investing in a clothing line right now. It's completely vegan leather. Super exclusive. You probably haven't heard of it yet. Madison didn't even look up from her phone when she added her contribution to my public roasting. She was scrolling through what I assumed was her lifestyle brand's Instagram page, the one that sold overpriced candles with names like Manifest Your Truth and had gone bankrupt 6 months after launch. Oh my God, Chad, leave him alone. Jake is our insurance policy. She actually winked at me when she said that. Someone has to be responsible while we actually live life, right? By the way, did you see my new G-Wagon? I wanted the electric Hummer, but the waiting list is like 2 years long. I just nodded. That's what I always do. I nodded and smiled and took another sip of the wine I brought. The $15 bottle that probably cost less than the corkscrew they used to open it. But in my head, I was doing math. I was calculating exactly how many billable hours I spent last month alone getting Chad out of his 3rd DUI. The lawyer fees, the court costs, the settlement with the guy whose mailbox Chad destroyed, or the time I spent helping Madison restructure her taxes after she forgot to report income from 3 different failed business ventures. The candles, the vegan leather, the essential oils pyramid scheme she swore wasn't a pyramid scheme. They live. I read the fine print so they can live. That's always been the deal in our family. My grandfather built a commercial real estate empire from nothing. Started with 1 strip mall in Houston in the 60s and turned it into a portfolio worth hundreds of millions by the time he died. My father and his siblings managed it, grew it, kept it stable through recessions and market crashes. Then came Chad and Madison and their siblings. The trust fund kids who never had to fight for anything because the money was just always there. And then there was me, the weird middle ground. My dad was the youngest, married late, had me when he was almost 50. So I grew up watching my cousins get everything handed to them while I was still eating generic cereal and wearing hand-me-downs. By the time I was old enough to benefit from the family wealth, the financial crisis hit, and suddenly being a lawyer who actually worked for a living seemed like a smart move instead of a disappointment. I went to law school on loans. Worked at mid-tier firms doing contract law. Nothing sexy, nothing exciting. Just reading documents and finding problems before they became lawsuits. My cousins thought it was pathetic. My aunt once introduced me at a party as the one who does something with papers. That was the best description she could manage. But there was one person in my family who was an even bigger black sheep than me. Uncle Arthur. Crazy Arthur, as everyone called him. My grandfather's youngest brother who lived like a hermit in a half-collapsed mansion in Key West, Florida. The family hated him. And I mean genuinely hated him. Not the polite kind of hate where you smile at Christmas and talk behind someone's back. The real kind where his name would come up and the entire room would go cold. Conversations would stop. Someone would change the subject immediately. My aunt would suddenly remember she needed to check on the turkey. My father would just shake his head and mutter something about wasted potential and mental illness. Chad and Madison would make jokes about him being the family embarrassment. The crazy old man who lived in squalor and probably talked to seagulls and conspiracy theories. But here's the thing. I was the only one who visited him. Once a year, every year for the past 15 years, I would fly down to Florida with a case of decent scotch and spend a long weekend at the asylum. That's what Arthur called his house. The asylum. He thought it was hilarious. He had a wooden sign hanging over the front door with those exact words burned into it. The place was exactly what you'd expect from the description. Peeling paint, rotting porch, shutters hanging by one hinge. Hurricane Irma back in 2017 had taken out an entire wall on the east side, and Arthur just boarded it up with plywood and kept living there like nothing happened. The whole house smelled like salt air, old books, and mildew, the kind of smell that gets into your clothes and stays there for days. But Arthur himself, Arthur was sharp as a blade, sharper than anyone in my family gave him credit for, sharper than anyone I've ever met. Actually, we'd sit on his screen porch overlooking the water, drinking his scotch. Never mine, always his, which was always better than what I brought, and we'd play chess for hours. Arthur was a brutal chess player, the kind who would sacrifice his queen just to see if you'd take the bait, the kind who thought 5 moves ahead and made it look effortless, the kind who would destroy you and then explain exactly how he did it, so you could learn from your mistakes. My family thought I visited out of pity. Poor Jake. Go to check on the crazy uncle, because nobody else will. They had no idea that those visits were the highlight of my year. The only time I could talk to someone who actually understood how things really worked. The only time I didn't have to explain why details mattered. Arthur had been a lawyer too, back in the 70s and 80s. Tax law, estate planning, trust structures, the boring stuff that made him a fortune, and that nobody wanted to talk about at parties. He retired at 55, bought the asylum, and proceeded to spend the next 30 years doing absolutely nothing that the family considered productive. They thought he'd gone insane, wasted his life, threw away his potential to rot in Florida humidity. But during our chess games, I'd see the way his mind worked, the calculations, the long-term thinking, the patience, and I started to realize that maybe Arthur wasn't crazy at all. Maybe he was just playing a different game than everyone else. Last year, during what turned out to be our final game, Arthur moved his knight into what looked like a terrible position. I was staring at the board, trying to figure out his angle. I'd just been venting to him about Chad's latest DUI, about how exhausted I was from cleaning up other people's messes, about how my cousins treated me like staff instead of family. Arthur didn't even look up from the board when he responded. You know what the best defense in chess is, Jake? It's not building walls. It's making your opponent think you're not worth attacking. Make them think you're weak, irrelevant, maybe even a little pathetic. He paused, moving his bishop into position. Never play a game you don't understand, especially when your opponents think they understand it. The best trap is the one the prey walks into while humming a tune. They're too busy congratulating themselves on their own brilliance to notice what's happening. He looked up at me, his eyes sharp. Underestimation is a weapon, son, and the beautiful part is your enemy hands it to you willingly, with a bow and everything. He pointed at the board. Checkmate. I hadn't even seen it building. I lost that game. I always lost. But I learned more from losing to Arthur than I ever learned winning against anyone else. Madison asked me about those visits once at a family barbecue. She was 3 margaritas deep and feeling philosophical. Or at least her version of philosophical. The kind where rich people pretend to care about things deeper than their next vacation. Why do you even go visit him? She scrunched up her nose like she smelled something rotten. That place reeks of mold and insanity. What? Are you hoping he'll leave you his collection of tinfoil hats? I just smiled at her. Something like that, I said. She laughed and went back to her phone, probably posting an Instagram story about how authentic and down-to-earth she was. How she was just a regular girl despite the G-Wagon, and the trust fund, and the designer clothes. The irony was completely lost on her. I thought about that conversation a lot over the years, especially during family events when Chad would make jokes about my Camry, or Madison would suggest I should really invest in better suits if I wanted to be taken seriously. I'd think about Arthur's words and just smile and nod and let them feel superior. The last time I saw Arthur was 8 months ago. It was our usual setup. Chess on the porch, scotch in hand, ocean breeze making humidity almost bearable. We played 3 games, and he won all 3, but the last one took me almost 2 hours to lose. He seemed pleased about that, proud, even. When I was packing up to leave, he walked me to my rental car. He moved slower than he used to. 82 years old, and a lifetime of Florida sun had taken their toll, but his eyes were still sharp, still calculating, still seeing things other people missed. He put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between affection and conspiracy. "Jake, you're a good man. Too good for those vultures you call cousins. Remember what I taught you. Patience, observation, and always read the fine print. Every word matters. Every clause. Every seemingly insignificant detail. That's where the real game is played." I told him I'd see him next year. Same time, same place. Maybe I'd finally bring scotch good enough to impress him. He laughed. That dry, raspy laugh that sounded like old leather. "Don't worry about the scotch, kid. I've got plenty. You just remember what I told you. All of it. Every word. It'll matter more than you think." I thought it was just Arthur being Arthur, cryptic and philosophical. The old lawyer who couldn't turn off the part of his brain that thought in strategies and contingencies. I had no idea it was goodbye. 6 weeks ago, I got the call from a lawyer I'd never met. Arthur had died in his sleep at 82, apparently while watching a Columbo rerun on some ancient TV that probably should have been in a museum. Natural causes. Peaceful. The way everyone hopes to go. No pain. No suffering. Just fell asleep and didn't wake up. The funeral was small. Me, a few distant relatives who showed up out of obligation, and Arthur's attorney, Mr. Fairburn, an old guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a different era. 3-piece suit. Pocket watch. The works. Chad and Madison didn't even bother attending. Madison texted me saying she was in Cabo and couldn't get a flight back in time, which was a lie because I saw her Instagram story at the beach the day of the funeral. Chad didn't bother with an excuse. Just didn't show up. But they sure as hell showed up for the will reading 3 weeks later. That happened at the most expensive law firm in Dallas. The kind of place with marble floors and original artwork and conference rooms that cost more per hour than most people make in a week. Everything about it screamed old money and power, and the kind of discretion that comes with handling fortunes for generations. The air conditioning was set to Arctic. The conference table could have seated 20 people comfortably, and at the head of it sat Mr. Fairburn, Arthur's attorney, with a leather portfolio that looked older than I was. Chad and Madison arrived 15 minutes late, wearing matching Tom Ford black. Morning attire that probably cost $5,000 combined. Designer grief. They sat at the front of the table, both immediately pulling out their phones. Chad was probably checking crypto prices. Madison was definitely checking Instagram engagement on her latest post about loss and family and cherishing the moments we have. I sat in the back. Same Brooks Brothers suit. Same old briefcase. The family insurance policy, ready to sign whatever needed signing and get back to my actual life. Fairburn cleared his throat with the kind of authority that comes from 40 years of reading dead people's wishes to disappointed relatives. He'd probably seen every variation of family drama that money could create. He opened the portfolio, adjusted his reading glasses, and began the last will and testament of Arthur Whitmore Caldwell. To my beloved nephews Chad and Madison, who have always known the price of everything But the value of nothing, Chad wasn't even listening. He was typing something on his phone, probably texting his broker about what to do with his inheritance. Madison was examining her manicure. Neither of them caught the insult that Arthur had literally written into his will. It went right over their heads like everything else that required reading comprehension beyond a third-grade level. Fairburn continued, his voice dry and professional. I leave all of my liquid capital, my investment portfolio, my stocks, bonds, and the entire contents of my primary trust fund. Madison's lawyer, some guy in a suit even more expensive than hers, leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Her face shifted into this subtle, satisfied smile. The kind of smile that said she just won something without having to work for it. The kind of smile that came from a lifetime of everything being handed to her on a silver platter. I heard the number. $20 million. Give or take. Probably closer to 22 with the way the market had been performing. Chad finally looked up from his phone. He actually fist-pumped under the table. Subtle as a brick, through a window. I saw Madison elbow him, but she was smiling too. Already planning how to spend it. Probably another G-Wagon. Maybe a house in Aspen. Definitely some more failed business ventures. Then Fairburn turned to me. He took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly with a cloth from his pocket, put them back on. The man had a sense of theater, I'll give him that. He knew exactly what he was doing. And to my nephew Jake, the only one who had the patience to play chess with me and laugh at my jokes about the tax code. The only one who saw me as something other than a crazy old man rotting in a mansion by the sea. The only one who actually gave a damn. The room went quiet. Even Chad put his phone down. Madison stopped examining her nails. To Jake, I leave my beloved estate, the asylum, located in Key West, Florida. The house, the land, and all of its contents. Most importantly, I leave in my library. Every book, every document, every piece of paper in that house. It's all yours, Jake. Read it well. There was a moment, just one moment of complete silence where nobody knew what to say. And then Chad laughed. Actually laughed out loud in a room where everyone else was maintaining funeral solemnity and professional decorum. This asylum? Uncle Jake, are you serious right now? That place is literally about to fall into the ocean. Hurricane Irma took out a whole wall like 7 years ago. The roof leaks. The plumbing is from like 1920. It's basically a condemned property with a fancy historical designation, preventing anyone from doing anything useful with it. Madison added her contribution with a look of exaggerated sympathy that was somehow worse than Chad's open mockery. At least Chad was honest about thinking I'd gotten screwed. Madison had pretended she cared while twisting the knife. Oh, Jake. Oh, sweetie. We actually looked into that property last year. Remember, Chad? We were going to tear it down and build something for TikTok content. Maybe a vacation rental situation. Beach house vibes. But the lawyer said it's historical heritage or something. Like protected. You can't even demolish it. You're just stuck with it. Like actually stuck with a building you can't use and can't get rid of. That's so unfortunate. She said unfortunate the way someone might say terminal illness. With pity and distance and a clear sense of thank God that's not me. Chad was still laughing, shaking his head. Dude, you got a condemned house and a bunch of moldy books. We got $20 million in liquid assets. No offense, man, but Uncle Arthur must have really hated you. Like genuinely had it out for you. That's brutal. Madison nodded sympathetically, her voice dripping with false concern. We'll help you figure out what to do with it, obviously. Family takes care of family, right? Maybe you can donate it for a tax write-off or something. Actually, does it even have value for a write-off? Can you write off negative equity? She turned to her lawyer, genuinely asking, like this was a fascinating intellectual puzzle instead of her cousin's inheritance. The lawyer shrugged. He probably charged $400 an hour to shrug like that. Chad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, already mentally spending his inheritance. You could always just walk away from it. Man, let the state deal with it. I mean, what are you going to do? Fix it up? That would cost millions. Millions you don't have. Just cut your losses. I didn't say anything. I just sat there hands folded on the table, and looked at Fairburn, really looked at him. And I saw it, the tiniest hint of something in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like recognition. Like he was waiting to see if I'd catch what everyone else was missing. Because I'm a lawyer. I read contract for a living. I analyze language. I look for the words that matter and the words that hide things. And I heard what Chad and Madison completely missed. The specific words. The deliberate phrasing. Liquid capital for them. The estate and the library for me. Arthur never used unnecessary words. Never. Every syllable was intentional. Every phrase was calculated. If he wanted to leave me just a house, he would have said just a house. But he said the estate and the library. Two separate things. Two separate assets. Which meant the library wasn't just books. It was something else. Something important enough to specify separately. And then there was the other phrase. The one that made my lawyer brain light up like a Christmas tree. Liquid capital. Not assets. Not estate. Not property. Liquid capital. Which was a very specific legal term meaning cash. Stocks. Bonds. Things that could be easily converted to money. Things that were explicitly not real estate or physical property. Fairburn slid the acceptance papers across the table to me. His face was completely neutral, but I swear I saw the tiniest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Like he knew, like he'd been Arthur's lawyer long enough to know exactly what game was being played. I picked up the pen. Chad was already back on his phone, probably texting someone about his $20 million inheritance. Madison was taking a selfie in her morning outfit. Black Tom Ford in perfectly applied tears. Grief as content. Loss as aesthetic. The modern American dream. I signed my name on every line that needed a signature. Slowly, carefully, the way I do everything. While my cousins smirked and whispered and congratulated themselves on their good fortune and my apparent bad luck. They had no idea. No idea at all. Madison Stage whispered to Chad, loud enough for me to hear. Do you think he'll ask us for money? To fix up the house? Because we should probably set boundaries now. Like we can help family, but we can't enable bad financial decisions. Chad nodded seriously, like he was some kind of fiscal responsibility expert instead of a guy who'd lost $2 million on crypto mining. Totally. We need to be supportive, but firm. I kept signing, kept my face neutral, kept being boring old Jake who never made waves and never caused problems. Marcus Aurelius once said that the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. But sometimes the best revenge is just being patient enough to let someone else destroy themselves. Sometimes the best revenge is just reading the fine print while everyone else is counting their money. I walked out of that conference room with nothing but a deed to a crumbling mansion and a library full of old books. Chad walked out with $20 million and plans for a new Porsche. Madison walked out planning how to invest her share in another lifestyle brand that would definitely work this time. But Arthur's words kept echoing in my head. The best trap is the one the prey walks into while humming a tune. And as I drove home in my Camry, past Chad's Mercedes and Madison's Range Rover in the parking garage, I found myself smiling, because for the first time in my life, I realized that maybe being the underestimated one wasn't a burden. Maybe it was exactly where I needed to be. A week later, I was on a plane to Key West with nothing but a carry-on bag and a growing sense that I was either about to discover something brilliant or confirm that my family was right about me being the biggest sucker in Texas. The asylum looked worse than I remembered, and I remembered it looking pretty bad. The paint had peeled down to bare wood in most places. The front porch sagged in the middle like a hammock. One of the shutters had finally given up and was hanging by a single rusted hinge, banging against the house every time the wind picked up. The plywood patch over the wall that Hurricane Irma destroyed 7 years ago had started to rot through. The whole place smelled like salt air, mildew, and neglect. Chad and Madison were right. It was a ruin, a liability, a money pit that would cost hundreds of thousands just to make livable and probably millions to actually restore. But I didn't fly down here for the house. I came for the library. Arthur's library took up the entire east wing of the second floor. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on every wall. Thousands of books. Law books. History books. First editions that probably hadn't been touched in decades. The kind of collection that would make a rare book dealer weep with joy or frustration, depending on their bank account. And right there on Arthur's desk, in the middle of stacks of yellowed papers and old chess magazines, was a single book, positioned perfectly in the center, like it was waiting for me. Florida Tax and State Law Handbook, 1983 edition. Beat up, water-stained, with a cracked spine that suggested someone had read it cover to cover multiple times. And sticking out of page 412 was a bright yellow post-it note. I sat down in Arthur's chair. The leather was cracked and worn smooth from decades of use. I could almost feel him sitting here, playing his long game, setting up dominoes that wouldn't fall for 40 years. I opened the book to the marked page. The Florida Historical Heritage Protection Act of 1981, repealed in 1991. But grandfather for any trust established before the repeal date. The law prohibited the forced sale of designated historical properties to satisfy tax liens if liquid assets existed elsewhere in this state. I read it 3 times. Then I pulled out my phone and started photographing every relevant page. The law, the repeal clause, the grandfather provision, the definition of liquid assets. All of it. Arthur had created his trust in 1982, right in the sweet spot, and he'd stopped paying property taxes that same year. For 30 years, he'd let that debt accumulate, knowing exactly what would become, knowing exactly how the family would try to use it, knowing exactly what trap he was building. The best trap is the one the prey walks into while humming a tune. I sat there in that moldy library, in that falling-apart mansion, and I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Because Arthur had just handed me a loaded gun, and my cousins had no idea it was pointed at them. 2 days later, we had the final Zoom call to transfer the assets. All the lawyers on one screen. Me in Arthur's library, still wearing the same Brooks Brothers suit, because apparently even in Florida humidity, I'm that predictable. Chad and Madison in what looked like Madison's minimalist white living room, probably staged specifically for the video call. Their lawyer, a guy named Skip, sitting between them with a smile that screamed Ivy League and trust fund management. Skip had that look. You know the one. The look of someone who's never lost an argument because Daddy's firm has been handling the family money for 3 generations. Perfectly white veneers. Hair that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly car payment. Suit that made my Brooks Brothers look like something from a thrift store. He was smiling. They were all smiling. So Skip began, leaning back in his chair like he was about to deliver news that would hurt him more than it hurt me. We've completed the assessment of the property, and I'm afraid we've discovered a significant problem. I waited. I didn't say anything, just looked at the camera. The property taxes on the asylum haven't been paid in approximately 30 years. With penalties and compound interest, the total debt to the state of Florida is $2.5 million. Madison sighed with what I'm sure she thought was convincing sympathy. Oh, Jake, this is just terrible. I mean, we had no idea Uncle Arthur had let it get this bad. But we're going to have to sell the property to cover the debt. I'm so sorry. You're not going to get anything from this. Chad nodded along, trying to look sad, but mostly looking relieved that he wasn't the one stuck with a tax bill bigger than most people's mortgages. At least you tried, man. Nobody can say you didn't try. Skip folded his hands on the desk in front of him. Unfortunately, the property is the only asset available to satisfy the lien. Under Florida law, tax liens take priority over inheritance claims. We'll need to begin foreclosure proceedings immediately. I let them sit with that for a moment. Let them think they'd won. Let them think I was just another lawyer who'd gotten outmaneuvered by someone smarter. Then I spoke. No. Skip's smile didn't waver. I'm sorry? No. You're not selling my house. The smile cracked. Just a little. Mr. Caldwell, I don't think you understand. This isn't optional. The debt exists. The property is the only asset. We don't have a choice. That's not true. I held up my copy of the will. The one I'd read probably 50 times since the reading. Section 4, paragraph B. All debts, including but not limited to any tax liens on real property, shall be satisfied from the primary investment trust prior to final distribution to beneficiaries. Skip actually rolled his eyes, like I was a child who just discovered his first legal textbook and thought I understood how the world worked. We saw that clause, Jake. It's a standard template provision. It applies to credit card debt, personal loans, that kind of thing. Not tax liens. Tax liens are attached to the property itself. That's foundational property law. The lien stays with the real estate. This doesn't cover a $2.5 million tax debt. Madison smiled sympathetically. So he's still stuck, right? Skip nodded. Completely stuck. Usually I said slowly. That would be true. I reached off camera and picked up the old tax law book, the 1983 edition that Arthur had left for me like a breadcrumb in a fairy tale, but not in Florida in 1983. That's when Uncle Arthur created his trust. I looked into it. I opened the book to the marked page, holding up to the camera. The Florida Historical Heritage Protection Act of 1981, repealed in 1991, but grandfather for all trusts established before the repeal date. It prohibits liquidation of designated historical properties to satisfy tax liens when liquid assets exist elsewhere in the same estate. I looked directly at Skip through the camera. The asylum was designated historical heritage in 1979. Arthur created his trust in 1982, specifically citing this protection, and he stopped paying property taxes that same year. For 30 years, he deliberately let this debt accumulate, knowing exactly what it would become. I turned to Chad and Madison. So here's what this means in plain English. Your $20 million in liquid assets now has a $2.5 million lien attached to it. You can't receive one single cent from the trust until my tax debt is paid in full. From your inheritance, not from my property. The room went silent. You could actually see the moment it hit them. Chad's mouth fell open. Madison's perfect Instagram face cracked into something between confusion and rage. That's not, Chad started. Theft? I interrupted. No, it's called reading the fine print. The thing you used to pay me to do. The thing your father used to pay me to do when you couldn't be bothered to handle your own legal problems. Except this time, I'm working for myself. Skip was frantically typing on his laptop, pulling up Florida state law databases, cross-referencing. His perfect hair wasn't quite so perfect anymore. This can't be right, he muttered. It's right. I had 3 separate law firms verify it. Arthur built a legal mousetrap, and he baited it with exactly the kind of arrogance you're all showing right now. You assumed I got nothing. You assumed you won. You assumed I was too stupid to see what he left me. As my uncle used to say while beating me at chess every single year for 15 years, never play a game you don't understand, especially when you think you understand it. I closed the book. The best part? Arthur didn't even break the law. He just stopped paying his property taxes and let you all assume he was crazy. Let you assume the debt was my problem. Let you walk right into a trap he started building 40 years ago. Chad stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. This is garbage. This is complete garbage. We'll fight this. We'll sue. We'll waste more of your inheritance on legal fees? I suggested. Go ahead. I've already filed the necessary paperwork with the probate court. My debt is now secured against your liquid assets. The law is clear. But please, hire more lawyers. Spend more money. Prove me right about everything. Madison was crying. Actual tears. The kind of tears that come when someone who's never lost anything realizes they just lost big. This isn't fair, she said. We're family. You're supposed to help family. I helped you file bankruptcy on your candle business. I helped Chad avoid jail time 3 times. I helped you restructure your taxes. I spent 15 years helping family. And every single time, you treated me like the help, like I was lucky to clean up your messes. I leaned closer to the camera. Uncle Arthur taught me something. Patience isn't weakness. It's ammunition. And I've been loading the gun for a very long time. Skip had gone pale. He'd found the law, found the grandfather clause, found the entire legal framework that Arthur had built. I'll need time to review this with my clients, he said quietly. Take all the time you need. The debt exists. The law is clear, and the clock is ticking on compound interest. Every day you wait costs you more money. I ended the call, and then I sat there in Arthur's chair, in Arthur's library, in Arthur's falling apart mansion, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years of being the family joke. I felt like I'd won. They fought. Oh, they fought hard. They hired 4 different law firms over the next 3 months. They screamed about fraud. They tried to have Arthur declared mentally incompetent retroactively, which was hilarious considering he'd practiced law for 30 years and retired with full mental faculties. They filed motions. They filed appeals. They threatened countersuits. Skip turned out to be less impressive when he wasn't sitting in a position of assumed victory. He made mistakes, procedural errors, filed paperwork late, the kind of mistakes that come from arrogance meeting reality. And every motion they filed cost them money, legal fees piling up. And the beauty of it was that every dollar they spent came from the same trust that owed me $2.5 million. They were basically paying their lawyers with my money to try to get out of paying me my money. The irony was delicious. Last Tuesday, the probate judge issued his ruling. A man who'd probably seen every variation of family drama that money could create. He'd read every brief, every motion, every desperate attempt to find a loophole in a law that Arthur had specifically chosen because it had no loopholes. The ruling was 8 pages long, but it boiled down to one sentence. The debt stands. The trust pays. Chad and Madison's trust was forcibly liquidated for $2.5 million to satisfy the tax lien on the asylum. But here's the beautiful part. Here's the part that made me understand just how much Arthur had thought this through. They spent $1.5 million in legal fees trying to fight me. $1.5 million of their own inheritance, burning it in a bonfire of arrogance and wounded pride. Try to prove they were smarter than a dead man who'd been planning this since before they were born. Out of $20 million, they lost $4 million before they saw a dime. And me? They paid $4 million to give me a house for free. The old money status they've been so proud of? Gone. Madison had to sell the G-Wagon. Chad had to move out of his downtown loft. I heard through the family grapevine that Madison is now trying to become a financial literacy influencer on Instagram, teaching people how to manage money. The irony could kill a stronger man than me. But the story doesn't end there. Remember how Arthur left me the library? Not just the house. The library, as a separate asset, with specific language that I didn't understand until I started the renovation. I hired contractors to fix the asylum. New roof, new plumbing, new electrical. Repair the hurricane damage. Make it livable. Turn it into something Arthur would have been proud of. And while they were working on the West Wing, I went back to that tax law book. The 1983 edition that had already given me everything I needed. On the very last page, in Arthur's handwriting, was a note I'd missed the first time. Jake, pull on Moby Dick. And don't be an idiot like your cousins. Moby Dick, the book. I went to the shelf, found the old hardcover edition of Moby Dick that Arthur had probably owned since law school, and I pulled it. The whole bookshelf swung open like something out of a movie. Behind it was a climate control room I had no idea existed. Temperature regulated, humidity controlled, professionally maintained. Inside were things Arthur had been hiding for decades. Things the family had no idea existed. Things that made the $2.5 million tax debt look like pocket change. First edition books. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Steinbeck. The kind of pristine first editions that collectors would commit crimes to own. Probably 50 of them, maybe more. A wooden chest filled with Spanish gold doubloons. Actual pieces of 8 that Arthur had apparently found while scuba diving in the 70s. The man had mentioned he liked to dive, but I thought he meant swimming pools. And 2 small paintings, unframed, wrapped in protective cloth. I almost didn't look at them because I assumed they were Arthur's amateur paintings from an art class or something. They weren't amateur. They were originals. Lost Winslow Homer paintings depicting Key West in the 1880s. Works that the art world thought had been destroyed in a fire. Works that Arthur had quietly acquired sometime in the 80s and hidden behind a fake bookshelf while the family called him crazy. Last week, Sotheby's gave me a preliminary appraisal. The books, the coins, the paintings, everything Arthur had hidden. $43 million. $43 million that legally belonged to the library that Arthur had specifically left to me as a separate asset from the house. I sat on Arthur's porch after I got that appraisal, drinking his scotch, the good stuff he always kept hidden, looking out at the ocean, and I finally understood the full scope of what he'd done. He'd given Chad and Madison $20 million, just enough to make them feel like winners, just enough to make them arrogant, just enough to make them stupid. And then he'd given me the rope to hang them with, the legal trap that would cost them $4 million of that inheritance, the humiliation of being outsmarted by the family loser. And then, as a bonus, as a final joke on everyone who'd ever called him crazy, he left me $43 million in treasure hidden behind a bookshelf like a pirate game. The man was a genius, an absolute genius. Chad and Madison still call. They think I should share. They say we're family. They say it's not fair that I got so much and they lost so much. Madison actually used the word equitable in her last voicemail, like she suddenly understood legal concepts when they benefited her. They always said I read too much. They were right. Turns out the habit of reading the fine print cost them $4 million. And it made me $43 million plus a restored oceanfront mansion in Key West. I had dinner with one of Arthur's old lawyer friends last month, a guy who'd known Arthur since the 70s and had apparently been in on the whole thing from the beginning. He told me a story I hadn't heard before. Arthur had originally planned to split everything evenly, treat all the nephews the same. But after years of watching Chad and Madison treat the family like servants, watching them waste money and opportunities, watching them mock anyone who actually worked for a living, he changed his mind. He decided to teach them a lesson, the most expensive lesson they'd ever learn. My friend smiled when he told me this. He said Arthur called it his magnum opus, his final case, the one he'd been preparing for longer than any trial, any negotiation, any legal battle he'd ever fought. And he won. Even from the grave, he won. I spent my whole life being the boring one, the responsible one, the one who showed up in a Camry and read contracts and cleaned up other people's problems. And it turns out that was exactly where I needed to be, because the best revenge isn't flashy. It isn't loud. It isn't immediate. The best revenge is patience, is watching your enemies destroy themselves, is reading the fine print while they're counting their money. I'm sitting on Arthur's porch right now as I write this. The renovations are almost done. The house looks like it did in old photographs from the 1920s. Beautiful, historic, worth preserving. The library is exactly as Arthur left it. I didn't touch a thing except to remove the treasure. Every book is still in place. Every chess magazine. Every old legal textbook. It's a monument to the man who taught me that being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's a weapon. And sometimes the weakest-looking piece on the board is exactly where you want to be. Chad called yesterday. He needs legal help with something. Some problem with an investment that went wrong. He actually had the nerve to ask if I'd help him. I told him my hourly rate. It's substantially higher than it used to be. He hung up. Marcus Aurelius said the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. But I think Arthur had a better philosophy. The best revenge is being patient enough to let your enemies walk into a trap while humming a tune. The best revenge is reading the fine print. The best revenge is being so thoroughly underestimated that nobody sees you coming until it's far too late. My cousins thought they inherited a fortune. They did. They just didn't realize they'd have to pay me $4 million to get it. I thought I inherited a ruin and some old books. Turns out I inherited the greatest practical joke in family history and $43 million in pirate treasure. As they say, being the boring lawyer has its perks, especially when you learn from the best.